Hi, everybody. Hopefully we'll have a chat with Alice Irving this evening, and I can set that as a premiere for just after we finish, literally. Obviously, over the weekend on Sunday, when it comes to journalists in the Making a Murderer case, obviously by far and away the best in recent times, John Farrak, still has a very healthy interest in the case, and indeed wrote The Wrecking Crew by going and visiting, usually every couple of weeks, spending time with Kathleen Zellner discussing the case. And, I think it's great that you've got somebody like John Farrak, who is a true investigative journalist, who really does look at these cases, goes and meets Zellner to get her take on this. And obviously the book is a real eye-opener, isn't it, into the corruption in Manitowoc. There's a whole chapter about Tom Kasurik, and quite rightly so. So I've always had this affinity for the Post-Crescent, because that's who John Farrak used to write for in Wisconsin. He's obviously now in Joliet in Illinois, and obviously very handy for him that it's not that far to Downers Grove in Chicago, where Kathleen T. Zellner has her law offices. So here is an article, the most recent, from the Post-Crescent. And so let's pop that up there. Get me out of the way. And we could also take that and move that up there. So it's kind of out of the way. That's better. Good. Okay, so this is by Chris Muller of the Appleton Post-Crescent. Twists and turns. A potential new witness for Stephen Avery could add yet another step in his appeal. Stephen Avery case through the years. As the judge read the verdict, Stephen Avery listened, then shook his head. That was on March the 18th, 2007, a Sunday. Steve was found guilty at the end of a 27-day trial of killing Teresa Holbach, a 25-year-old photographer who disappeared on Halloween in 2005. Steve, then 44 years old, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He had previously spent 18 years of a 32-year sentence for a sexual assault that he did not commit, before he was eventually exonerated by DNA evidence in 2003. Would have been a lot sooner with the confession by Gregory Allen, had that phone call Andy Corbin took, had been passed on to Steve's defense lawyers, post-conviction lawyers. His story was featured in the Netflix documentary series Making a Murderer, which casts huge doubt on the motives of police investigating Teresa's death, and left many viewers throughout the world with the impression, very strong impression, a surety that Steve, now 58, and his nephew Brendan, now 31, were wrongfully convicted. And not just accidentally, deliberately convicted. After a Sheboygan County judge, well, we know who that is, Judge Superwitch, refused to grant Steve a new trial, his attorney, Kathleen T. Zellner, brought the case to the Wisconsin Court of Appeals. A legal back and forth ensued, but the appeals court indicated late last year that the case had been submitted on briefs and was awaiting a decision. But in documents filed on April the 12th, Kathleen Zellner claims a new witness delivery driver Thomas Sowinski saw a shirtless Bobby Dassey, Brendan Dassey's brother and Avery, Steve's nephew, and an unidentified older male pushing a Toyota RAV4 down Avery Road toward the junkyard in the early morning hours of November the 5th, 2005. Sowinski drove past the two men and delivered newspapers to a mailbox and then turned round and began to drive off the property. But Bobby Dassey attempted to step in front of his car to block him from leaving, the court document says. Sowinski came within 5 foot of Bobby Dassey, and his headlights were on Bobby during this entire time. Then Sowinski swerved into a shallow ditch to escape. We now even have the tire tracks. I called out, "Paperboy, gotta go," because I was afraid for my safety, Sowinski recalled in a signed affidavit. Bobby Dassey looked me in the eye, and I could tell with the look in his eyes that he was not happy to see me there. Well, I don't know that that's a reliable thing to say, that you can tell by the look of somebody's eye. But anyway, Teresa's vehicle, a Toyota RAV4, was found later that day at the Avery salvage yard. When he heard, Sowinski realized the significance of what he had seen and contacted the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office. But in typical MTSO fashion, weren't bothered. They said a female officer told him, "We already know who did it," the court documents say. Zellner, in an 11-page document detailing Sowinski's claims, asks the appeals court to put Avery's current appeal on hold and send his case back to the circuit court to deal with the new claims. If the appeals court chooses not to grant Steve's request, the judges could instead rule on the current appeal with the material previously submitted by both sides, said Michael O'Hare, a law professor at Marquette University. Steve would still be able to raise his new claims with the circuit court at a later date, O'Hare said. It's really a question of timing, he said. Courts don't deal with the same case at the same time. Okay, seems a bit bizarre. If the appeals court does grant Steve's latest request, the current appeal would be paused and the case would be sent back to circuit court, where a judge, presumably Superwitch, would have to consider all of the evidence presented at trial and decide if these new claims would have led to a different outcome. It's hugely important, obviously, from that point of view. Hugely, hugely important that Pam of God wasn't the first one to find the RAV once it went missing on Halloween. In other cases, often courts will decide the new information isn't enough to sway the outcome, O'Hare said. In the court documents, Steve claims the state suppressed evidence of Sowinski's report to the sheriff's officer, especially that he had witnessed Bobby Dassey and another individual in possession of and moving Teresa's vehicle onto the Avery salvage yard after Teresa's disappearance. The suppressed evidence was favorable to the defense, the court documents say, and pivotal to the outcome of Steve's trial because it would have destroyed entirely the credibility of Bobby as the state's primary witness. I think Kathleen's already done that, but this is just another nail in Bobby's coffin, as it were, that he's going to have to account for, you know, what he's done to help convict Steve and ultimately his own brother. It would have destroyed entirely the credibility of Bobby as the state's primary witness, established that Bobby was directly involved in the murder of Teresa, and established that Bobby planted evidence to frame his uncle. Bobby Dassey testified at Steve's trial that he saw Teresa pull up his driveway at 2:30 in the afternoon, get out of her vehicle, take pictures of his mum's maroon van, and walk toward the door of Avery's trailer, then never saw her again, according to the court documents. Kathleen rigorously investigated Sowinski's claims over a period of more than 3 months after Sowinski contacted her law firm on December the 6th, 2020, a process that involved multiple background checks and interviews, along with a review of prior evidence in the case, according to court documents filed with the appeals court Thursday. It isn't unheard of, but it is somewhat unusual for new evidence to turn up in the middle of the appeals process, O'Hear said. On the other hand, everything about this case is unusual, he said. We can't be surprised by any new twists and turns. Steve's case has been the focus of a great deal of public attention, O'Hear said. So O'Hear must have been tuned in to keep talking till they're walking. So it isn't entirely shocking for new information to come to light at this point, even if it wouldn't be typical in any other case. Given it's such a high-profile case, it's not all that surprising to see a new person step forward claiming to have some new information, he said. Oh, excuse me. Like I said, I think I got up far too early this morning. He woke me up at stupid o'clock, like 6 o'clock. I mean, that's fine for Pete Dassey to be getting up at 5 o'clock and leaving for work at 5 o'clock in the morning, but you know, he's half man, half moose. So you know, he's a different type of creature altogether. And we love the moose, and we'll look forward to having a chat with him at our regular Saturday afternoon slot. Well, 8 o'clock in the evening for me, but 2 o'clock in the afternoon for Pete. He's looking forward to that. Always great to have a bit of fun with Pete, with his humorous. I'll look at one or two humorous things. Anyway, interesting that you know, the Post-Crescent, they've been the one news outlet that I think have been very, very responsible in all of this. You know, going back to the days of John Farrack and Alison Durr. And wasn't it interesting? Back when Kathleen Zellner submitted her motion for post-conviction testing of items, that big document back in August of 2016, I read that in a Post-Crescent article, which I wrongly thought was John Farrack, that in it mentions the fact that the reporter, the journalist, having, you know, got a copy of this motion, went across, obviously from the courthouse next door to the sheriff's office, to speak to Robert Herman, who wasn't available. And it was funny because a couple of days later, I was on the phone to Robert, and I said, you know, why didn't you give John Farrack an interview? And he said, well, I can choose who I want to speak to. And it wasn't John Farrack, it was Alison Durr. He knew exactly who was knocking on his door, and he was just hiding from a Post-Crescent journalist. It wasn't that he was unavailable at all. He just didn't want to say anything at that stage. I think by that stage as well, it was not long after that he stopped talking to me. I think that they gagged him, because he did tend to, sometimes put his foot in it. Remember when Making a Murderer first came out, and he was quoted as telling people that it's a very biased, one-sided documentary. And again, when asked, well, have you watched it? He had to concede that no, he hadn't watched it. It's quite funny. I mean, I wish Sheriff Herman was still there, and I could chat with him, because I think it would have been good. One of my mistakes that I admitted to the dude was, I said I shouldn't have been so hard on Robert Herman. I should have maybe given the impression that, the more I talk to him, the more I question the case, as if I'm sort of pretend that I'm sort of turning towards his point of view, when in fact, of course, the complete opposite has been the case. I was convinced of Stephen and Stephen Brendan being innocent after watching Making a Murderer. I was convinced that the sheriff's department is involved in that disappearance of Teresa. Having followed the case for 5 years now, I've my conviction, if you like, my mind has never ever wavered, and all we've ever seen over these last 5 years is Kathleen Zellner developing more and more evidence to show the corruption in law enforcement in Wisconsin, and the innocence, obviously, of Stephen Brendan. Anyway, sermon finished for the day. We'll catch you all again soon. Take care. Bye for now.